Did you like Michelle Jones-Watson from the MCU? If you didn't, then watch this video and I'll explain to you why we were all a little bit too harsh on her from the start. Zendaya's Michelle Jones-Watson, to give her her proper name, has been under a lot of criticism since her character first appeared in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with many critics and fans comparing her character with the likes of Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane Watson and Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy, stating that her character is nowhere near as compelling as those other Spider-Man love interests. However, what if I told you that she never really was intended to have that level of depth that those other characters had in the first place? While it was definitely intended for this version of MJ to become Peter's main love interest come the end of the trilogy, I don't think her character was ever really intended to be on the level of, for example, Gwen Stacy from the TASM movies. Because during the time of Spider-Man Homecoming, she was almost a background character, popping up with one-liners here and there, and not really doing much. Many people know Zendaya from Homecoming from just being this quirky teenager that kind of just hates everything. And for the people that don't really understand why she couldn't have received a slight bit of development or depth to her character, I think we have to look at where Homecoming's interests lie. During the film, Laura Harrier's Liz Allen was the main love interest for Peter Parker throughout the film. And her character's connection and involvement with Adrian Toomes is the main conflict that the character has to deal with, giving her depth throughout the film. And that twist cemented Liz as a very interesting character throughout Homecoming. It was an interesting take, and this decision to make her Adrian Toomes' daughter really fleshed out Liz's character and made her probably one of the more interesting parts of the movie. MJ, or Michelle as she was known at the time, didn't receive anything but one-liners, as we said. But that was the point. Michelle was meant to be this mysterious figure in the background of Peter's life. Someone that is closed off, overcritical, mysterious. If anything, looking back on it, Zendaya's MJ really does execute a lot of traits that are commonly associated with the comic book version of Mary Jane Watson. Someone with a dark backstory and insecurities that is covered up by some kind of portrayal on the outside. And I think people need to understand that this intention to have MJ be a big character in the first film was never there. So for those people who complain about her lack of depth throughout the whole trilogy, you gotta understand, starting off in Spider-Man Homecoming, she was never even intended to be that big of a character, just kind of in the background and mysterious. However, this is where we move on to Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, while this video is mainly trying to play a positive spin on MJ's character throughout the trilogy, I can't lie, Far From Home is really where this character loses points, if it loses them anywhere. I felt like since she was elevated to the lead female in that film, there was a lot more that they could have done with her character, similar to what they did in No Way Home, and what they proved they could do with Liz in Spider-Man Homecoming. But No Way Home aside, since we'll talk about that later, Far From Home accentuated her traits from Homecoming, basically giving us more of the same thing, except Zendaya was now the lead actress. Even though they could have introduced new and interesting details to the character, they didn't, which is why they lose a lot of credit for me when it comes to this movie. But I think we've got to understand that even though we didn't get anything more interesting to the backstory of the character didn't really do anything criminal. The film didn't ruin the character in any way, but rather missed the potential to make her character better than before. At the end of the day, the positives to take away from Spider-Man Far From Home is that despite the character being rather two-dimensional in certain aspects, at least the connection between her and Peter was built upon, and that is something that I like, and that if they didn't do this in Far From Home, wouldn't have come off as well in No Way Home. And looking back at what we really knew about the character in Far From Home, Peter also didn't really know much about her anyway, and since we see the film mostly from Peter's point of view, I guess it aligns us with Peter's character even more when you think about it from that perspective. Either way, this builds us into Spider-Man No Way Home, which is where I think MJ's character really shines. Now, if No Way Home had done more of the same that Far From Home did, then I think we would be having a very different conversation. However, No Way Home took the extra step with the character and built upon what was successful about her character from the first two films. MJ in No Way Home is based upon insecurities. The insecurities that were once hinted at throughout Homecoming and obviously Far From Home as well. And leading back to the comic books, insecurities for Mary Jane Watson in those books is a massive trait of her character, and they were built into what made Zendaya's version of the iconic redhead so good. The character was established to have a mysterious aura, and No Way Home ran with this. We get hints that potentially her past wasn't the greatest. She's always pessimistic about the outcome of dicey situations, which suggests a past full of disappointment. And as we know from the comics, as we've discussed in many videos about Mary Jane Watson recently, her backstory isn't the greatest. Her father abused her mother and also verbally abused Mary Jane as well. MJ always had this insecurity that her family would leave her, that she couldn't really get close to anyone else. Which perfectly explains why she is being so distant with Peter in Homecoming, when it is explicitly made clear that in Far From Home, MJ clearly has feelings for him. And as she says in No Way Home, expect disappointment and you'll never be disappointed. Which, to be fair, is quite good advice, actually. However, during the midpoint of the film, MJ has to comfort Peter, who griefs his Aunt May, who was killed by the Green Goblin. For the sake of Peter and for the sake of the multiverse, MJ has to stay positive. MJ's character is forced to see the bright side of the situation, because if she doesn't, the stakes of the whole mission to save the multiverse and everything is going to go to absolute pot. And therefore, this arc allows her to process things more positively and more optimistically. Her optimism is drawn out by realizing that despite the dark times, Peter has to keep his head up. And in Peter's darkest time, when he wanted to give in to the idea that they may fail, MJ reminds him that no, they can't fail and they won't. This character arc for MJ in No Way Home is slept on by the critics and fans alike, and I feel like people don't give it the recognition that it actually deserves. It's subtle, it's sweet, and yeah, there's a part of me that wishes maybe we saw more of this through Far From Home, and even parts of No Way Home to some extent as well. But her character did her job. Her character was successful in executing the themes set out by the film. It didn't contradict itself, it built on the success of the character previously, and also executed her arc in No Way Home to perfection as well. And in my opinion, I think fans and critics expected way too much of MJ in this trilogy. And yes, when you come off the back of Kirsten Dunst's MJ from the Raimi trilogy, and especially Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy from the TASM movies, you'd expect the Spider-Man love interest to be, you know, top tier, because Spider-Man love interests have always been top tier. And just to round up, I never thought that Zendaya's MJ was meant to be as big as a force in these films as people wanted her to be. And maybe that's a criticism of the franchise itself. Maybe MJ should have been a bigger character right from the start. But for what we got, I think overall we were a bit too early to criticize and complain about what we should have got, when I believe that we got a character that objectively was completely fine the way that she is. And no, she isn't as compelling as Gwen from TASM, but I don't think a lot of superhero romantical side plots are. Peter and Gwen's relationship was the staple of those movies, and Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone have exceptional chemistry together in those films as well. I'd like to think that the Amazing Spider-Man movies are successful as they are because of those two characters. I think the real charm from those movies comes from the romantical relationship of Peter and Gwen Stacy. However, when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Spider-Man, there was a lot more to them than just the romance. It was the youthfulness, it was the connection to the larger world. There was Tony Stark, Aunt May was a bit younger, everything was a bit more hip. Things were a lot different than they were in previous franchises. So obviously the romance did take a slight bit of a back step. But who knows, maybe going into MCU Spider-Man 4 and future Spider-Man movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we could potentially get more stories with MJ Watson and more stories between them two together. But anyway, with that being said, thank you guys for watching this video. If you want to see a video on why I think Mary Jane Watson is a very poorly adapted character in comic book history in general, you can watch my video on the end screen of this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video. Take care and peace.